So let's welcome our speaker coming from Anglo-American. So the general manager in terms of the marketing for the Asia-Pacific precious metal. Let's welcome Madame Zhu Li. First of all, thank you for having me to attend this Shanghai Platinum Week. It's my pleasure to attend the International PGM Monkey Summit under COVID-19. It's very, very great endeavor that we can still successfully convene and hold the Shanghai Platinum Week. Thank you, the organizing committee, for making it happen. This is a very successful exchange platforms for everyone. Today, the topic I want to talk to everyone is about the PGM and its application in the hydrogen industry. For the friends who have come to our precious metal conference before, you might believe that this is another presentation about PGM and hydrogen. But think about the near zero carbon emission means that it has become a reality. So for us to understand the size and the risks of those opportunities, prior to the start of my presentation, I'm going to do some disclaimer. The views and content I'm going to say are only offering some reference points only. Well, first of all, we have to understand that hydrogen is not a futuristic, forward-looking thing. It's a successful industry. Over the past 4 decades, hydrogen has already generated a reasonable growth. That's very important. But in the past, it has almost nothing to do with precious metal. Right now, so in the synthetic ammonia, as well as the oil refinery industry, about 70 million tons every year being produced and used every year. But actually, they are mostly used for chemical properties for oil refining and ammonia production. They are using natural gas or gas industrial byproduct. But think about PGMs play a very little role in this area. Why is that the case? Because the green hydrogen is the game changer. And also the near zero carbon emission is also the game changer. It's going to change the role of the PGM in the economy. I believe that the zero carbon emission is something we must do. Most of the major economies, including China, have each published their guideline by the year 2060. So the carbon emission will be reduced to zero. In order to achieve that vision target, all we need to have to do is for the industry to have a fundamental transformation. Green hydrogen will have its relevant role to play. Green hydrogen is using the renewable energy, trying to use an electrolyzer to generate hydrogen from water electrolysis. And then this is a hydrogen without emitting any carbon. So whenever we have a green hydrogen, and then that is to say that it will have a larger scale and completely different application areas. I'm mindful of the fact that a lot of presentations will be focusing on the issue of hydrogen. So what about the application area of a green hydrogen? I wouldn't have the time to go into greater depths about it. So there's the issue of why do we have a keep eye on hydrogen? Because PGM, it has been used for both sides of the equation. So I think the key is the electrolyzer. So we call it like the proton exchange membrane. So PEM will need to have iridium and platinum in order to generate a green hydrogen. But at the same time, there are other different electrolyzers as well. So for the PGM, demand, actually it means that they don't have to use a PGM or use very little of that. By comparison, PEM is very appropriate for using like renewable energies. For example, if you use a green hydrogen in fuel cell battery, you may have to use a PGM. Compared with a PEM electrolyzer, so the PEM fuel cell will have to use platinum as a catalyst. For other different types of fuel cell, they will need some catalysts as well. Some of them are trying to use ruthenium. So for the PGM, in the development of hydrogen, from its evolution to its storage purification, I'm going to focus on those 2 different technologies. It's safe to say that. So think about the demand for the electrolyzer. The fuel cell has a lot of potential for growth. And in the same light, this is bringing a lot of opportunities for the growing demand for PGM. How are we going to evaluate them? First of all, so let's try to look at some opportunities for using PGM and their risk factors. So let's try to look at the electrolyzer. You can tell the fact that for the PGM, there is a potential big demand for that. So I think it has a very robust demand and a robust momentum as well. People have come to the realization that, so in terms of promoting the zero carbon emission, hydrogen has an important role to play. So all the government agencies and the companies are interested in exploring with such a technology. But the risk being that aside from the PEM electrolyzer, but other ways of hydrogen making are available. The first one is availability of iridium. So in the next few slides, I'm going to deep dive for more discussion in the next few slides. Well, for the fuel cell, the PGM demand, I believe that is going to be very huge. By comparisons, momentum is going to be mild. The opportunities for fuel cell lies in the fact that actually the heavy transportation vehicle fixed their charging station like trucks and trains and also the vessels, and energy diversity is also needed as well. So the major factors for risks of the fuel cell is like the light duty vehicles. But think about like the battery EVs are very successful. But think about the upgrading of a fuel cell battery because of lack of infrastructure and the green hydrogen. It comes with some barriers.
Well, later on, I will cover that in great detail. In particular, I'm going to talk about some of the issues at play here. But let's just start with electrolyzers and green hydrogen, and let's talk about PGM demand in green hydrogen and electrolyzers. In 2021, demand for PGM was relatively small at only 165 tons and 120 tons for iridium and about 45 tons for platinum. A few words about how to do the calculation. So according to BNEF forecast, 458 megawatts, and PAM, we need to have the proportion of PAM that uses PGM and which is 31%, and then we need to understand how much precious metals actually an electrolyzer use given fixed capacity. Of course, different manufacturers have different parameters on that front, and there are differences on part of different manufacturers. So based on all these and based on the calculation, we calculated that 0.8 gram of iridium per kilogram and 0.3 gram per kilogram or per kilowatt hour for platinum. If PAM's proportion is around 31%, that means for 0.15 GW of PAM electrolyzers times the loading amount, and that will give you the demand for precious metal. 165 kilogram is not a large number, it's a small number actually. In particular, in 2021, total demand for precious metal was around 600k tons. That number is even smaller. Given all these uncertainties, as we evaluate potential demand for precious metal going forward, we need to take into consideration a series of factors. We need to start with all these various factors. So firstly, we need to calculate how much hydrogen we need and what will be the proportion of green hydrogen. In other words, hydrogen produced from electrolyzers, what will be the proportion of green hydrogen. And second, we need to consider compared with other types of electrolyzers, how much of them is PAM electrolyzer, and lastly, PEM or PAM electrolyzers, how much PGM will be coated on the surface of such electrolyzers, and what will be the proportion of iridium and platinum respectively. I will cover all these later on in greater detail, but the key here is how much comes from green hydrogen and how much precious metal is used in coating the PEM or PAM electrolyzers. So as we know that demand for electrolyzers is highly likely to grow very rapidly going forward, but there are uncertainties, with the biggest one being how much green hydrogen will we need going forward. In other words, how much PAM electrolyzer capacity will we need going forward. In the short run, it represents the extent and speed of green hydrogen development, but in the longer run, that's related to the total hydrogen needed to achieve net zero. Well, the two are basically more or less the same question. So here I would like to say a few words about a couple of these things. Firstly, it's too early to make any definitive conclusion because in 2021, total capacity less than 0.05 GW, and total hydrogen produced was less than 1% of the total hydrogen that might be needed in the future in 2021. As I mentioned, that the momentum is strong. According to some forecasts, 2022 total installed capacity is going to range between 1.8 to 2.4 GW. In other words, this year's total output of electrolyzer might reach 3 GW. In other words, it will be 6 times higher than 2 years ago. Even if that is the case, that being said, only a small amount of hydrogen around the world is green hydrogen. Let's just assume that 1 kilowatt capacity can get us 70 or 77,000 tons of green hydrogen. And at the end of this year, total output of green hydrogen will reach 200K tons, only accounting for 23% of total demand globally. In other words, they will replace part of the hydrogen that are available today. And however, in terms of as a total replacement and reaching at zero, the potential is just huge here. That's the third point I want to say. And well, next, according to some forecasts by IEA, by 2030, about 100 GW project or installed capacity will start operation. And according to McKinsey, out of all the projects that have already been announced, about 335 GW, and most of them will start operation by 2030. In addition to that, we need more green hydrogen. We will need more than 900 kMW of green hydrogen. So according to IEA, in order to reach net zero by 2030, 850 GW, and by 2050, the number will be even higher. Well, we don't know if that will become reality, but this will represent a tremendous endeavor. After 20 years of expansion, wind and solar capacity now amount to 150 GW, and the number is expected to even go up in the future. So in the short run, under certain circumstances, the total supply of electrolyzer industry exceeds demand. And in the steelmaking industry, government subsidies might be needed. However, that may become a giant or gigantic sector, and by 2030, total annual installed capacity will reach or increase to 20 to 40 GW, which will represent 50 to 100 times the level in 2021. PGM. Demand for PGM from this sector will also grow at very fast speed. We look forward and we really want to see such growth. However, we do see problems for iridium. You don't understand why. Let's just take a look at the iridium market. Iridium is a product with extensive applications. It is part of the PGM group. Iridium output is very small. It only accounts for only 4% of the total PGM mined in South Africa underground. In Russia and in North America, the figure is even smaller. In other words, only 8 tons of mines annual use or annual consumption of iridium, 8 tons, which represent the smallest amount out of all the PGM metals. However, iridium has extensive applications because of its melting point as well as endurance. So it has extensive applications. It can be used for producing semiconductors as well as other applications in biochemical industry and in biopharmaceutical industry and in metallurgy industry. Currently, iridium is the second most expensive out of all the PGM in metals, and its price elasticity is next to nothing. It's barely there. However, will the small market size of iridium be a restraint or be a constraining factor for the growth of PEM electrolyzer? Because if every year only produce 8 tons of iridium, it's only a very small portion, and it's a semi-product of the PGM. In other words, its supply is not going to increase very much with any time soon. So in the short to medium run, if we take a look at the total demand currently stands at 2% of total supply iridium, though electrolyzer or PEM electrolyzer will grow rapidly, meaning that iridium's proportion in the next couple of years will keep increasing. However, according to current forecasts, demand by electrolyzer is still fall short of other industries. Well, many things too. Well, this is partly a result of the amount of iridium needed during coating, and such amount needed will keep decreasing as is shown on this chart, on the slide in the chart. As we know that internationally, 0.5 gram per kilowatt hour of coating of iridium. In other words, the annual electricity generation will reach 16 kWh, and in the future, we'd expect that the amount of iridium needed for coating will be even lower, which means that 160 GW annually of power generation might be possible, though it seems a wild dream, but it's not completely impossible. Let me just give you an example. The use of iridium in solar panel between 2005 to 2015, it went down about 90%. Not only that, not all electrolyzers are PEM electrolyzers. Well, that means that if, say that PEM electrolyzers coating of iridium increases to 0.1 gram per kilowatt hour, well, which will be coupled with such technologies, recycling technology and other technologies. Even if that is the case, by 2030, the installed capacity of electrolyzers reach the forecast 20 to 40 GW annually. Every year, demand for iridium will only stand at less than 10 tons. So this is something that we can make direct association. Depending on the overall demand for PGM, if the coating of platinum is equivalent to that of iridium, that is only a very small amount for platinum. Well, let's say that if platinum can to some extent replace some iridium, which is something that we do believe is possible. It's just that some electricity efficiency will be lost. However, its application or such replacement or such substitution in some applications is totally acceptable. That's why we are seeing a lot of R&D work ongoing or underway on this front. However, for platinum, demand for platinum by hydrogen might manifest itself in the form of converting hydrogen into power or into electricity. This is a procedure that doesn't require any iridium. Fuel cells have been there for a long time. However, only when green hydrogen becomes a reality does it become green energy, because such combination makes generation as well as consumption pollution free. In particular, in South Korea, demand for fuel cell is tremendous and the number just keep increasing. The biggest demand for fuel cell comes from the transportation industry. As you can see from the chart shows you in 2005 various vessels or tools of transportation, how much they demand and how much they consumed energy. There are various ways to cut back on emissions from the transportation industry, but as is showing on the slide, fuel cell vehicles in scenarios of long range and heavy duty transportation, fuel cells just have greater potential, for example, in the area of aircraft, truck, as well as railway. That is the reason it's going to present a giant source of demand for fuel cell vehicles or for heavy-duty vehicles. In the short run, represent the most promising area for fuel cell vehicles, and mostly around the world, heavy-duty vehicle manufacturers have published their own version of planning for developing fuel cell vehicles, and some of them have already launched their fuel cell vehicles to the market. And this area, we believe that APAC area will lead the growth of this area. In June this year, China's first auto already delivered hydrogen-powered urban transportation trucks to a number of cities in China. And almost at the same time, Volvo announced their plans to develop hydrogen fuel cell vehicle with a range as long as 1,000 kilometers and the charging time less than 15 minutes. So that area alone will contribute hundreds of thousands of tons or hundreds of thousands of ounces demand for PGM. However, in terms of demand, light-duty vehicles represent the biggest source of demand. However, its prospect remains uncertain. Not because fuel cell or hydrogen fuel cell vehicles do not make any contribution to decarbonization. In fact, a ICCT, an environmental protection agency that's recognized worldwide, said that there are only two effective ways to truly reduce GHG emissions from this industry. The first is fuel cell vehicle, and the second is electric battery-powered vehicles. In fact, the first fuel cell vehicle was invented as early as 1960s. That was produced by General Motors. It was a fuel cell vehicle. Well, as a prototype, it has very good range performance as well as property performance. However, it took the vehicle 3 hours to actually start running on the ground. We believe that the newest model of fuel cell vehicles has been much or has seen great growth compared with the prototype. And battery-powered vehicles are also growing by leaps and bounds. You're all familiar with Tesla, BYD, and other brands.
So most of the domestic OEMs will have their BEV. Now we can see ubiquitous presence of a lot of charging facilities like charging poles and home-based charging facilities, which means that charging is not a problem. Even given that, I don't rule out the possibility and the statement that still the fuel cell car is still taking out some decent market share. So some key important factors are already ready and play their role. The first one is a necessity. Think about the zero carbon emission. This requires all different stakeholders to provide some innovation approaches to minimize our carbon footprint. In terms of the self-sufficiency supply of energy, this is a reminding call for every nation where we have to get rid of our dependence on fossil fuels. And the second one is the suitability. Think about a fuel cell vehicle. These are only one of the two options of decarbonization, but of the two, this is the only choice for us to achieve the zero carbon. And more clear that in terms of sustainable development, they are playing a very important role. So fuel cell vehicle compared with an EV, they need different resources as input. So think about the marginal mining as well as the impact on energy. We have to think about actually, for example, they will think that actually they will make the transition towards a zero carbon emission cheaper and more user-friendly. The next one is about opportunities. Even though that all the different governments tend to focus on the battery vehicle, but there are 30 different countries who have promulgated their national hydrogen development strategy, of which for its application for mobile transportation, they will have their plan as well. The next one is the practicality. So the major areas of stopping the development of fuel cell vehicle is a lack of available and cheap hydrogen. But as you have probably observed that the supply of green hydrogen has been expanding. Now, based on the announced plan, and I think things are improving as well. If you take all those factors in place, you put them together, we are of the firm belief that very soon that we can see the sixth one, commercialization. I do admit that this is in the process of being developed, but because a lot of OEMs in the heavy-duty vehicle, they are trying to use a fuel cell route, so it's not very difficult to imagine that they will have to reimagine the light-duty vehicle, and especially given that there are a lot of clear benefits of diversified mobility. In China, hydrogen economy is developing, is booming. So we can see that the status quo and the future of hydrogen development here in China. So the data doesn't need to be repeated. So in the first half of 2022, so there are about 10,903 different FCEV, 270 hydrogen refilling stations, 2.5 gigawatt of installed electrolyzer capacity. By the year 2030, there will be like 1 million FCEVs, 5,000 hydrogen refilling stations, and about 80 to 100 gigawatt of installed electrolyzer capacity. And this is a very surprising development speed. So now I would like to share with you what are Anglo-American doing in order to promote the hydrogen economy as well as the fuel economy development. So we can see here, on both fronts, we can play a role. On the one hand, we can create the direction for the business development. The second one is that we can develop the environment for business. Well, by developing the right direction for business development, we can identify and initiate and activate and also invest in those places of which actually there are the partners in the hydrogen economy that will make a difference together. A lot of partners are actually related to the research of the fuel cell battery and hydrogen. So in terms of developing a business-friendly environment, on the one hand, for the zero carbon emission, we have spared no efforts to do the publicity, even though most of the zero carbon emission has been promoted by the government agenda. On the other hand, we can share market information and do communication. We have learned from participants about the size and information from the industry to make sure that everyone is on the same page about the practicability of production. Last but not least, the third thing we can do is as follows. We can lead by example. As a mining company, Anglo-American made our commitment to see that by the year 2040, we are going to achieve carbon neutrality. So while the diesel mining vehicle is the biggest emitter of the GHG, so that's why it's a very natural choice and decision that we made a decision to think about taking the appropriate measures to switch that to the fuel cell powered mining truck. And recently in this year, we have already initiated the new gen launch. For example, for the fuel cell powered mining truck. Let's roll a video to show you how exactly we can try to convert our biggest emission source of GHG into something powered by fuel cell battery.
This is it. Wow. Exactly. We took this truck, had about 70,000 hours on it. It was about 8 years old on the mine, and we've completely retrofitted it, and we've turned it into a 100% electric vehicle. The team completely redesigned it to be full electric, so there's electric motors now driving the hydraulics, electric motors doing all the cooling, and all of that needs to be managed in one system. So they designed this from scratch, incorporating that all together. The water, that's the only emission from this vehicle coming out the exhaust. So today we have 150 tons loaded in the back of the vehicle. This will put out 2 megawatts. We do that consistently in power. So from a South African perspective, this system is really well suited. You've got wonderful renewable resource. Obviously, we did this platinum mine, and the key ingredient in the fuel cells is platinum.
As you can see, we are actively working towards increasing our role in decarbonisation of our own mines, but ultimately developing entire industries that will benefit from this technology.
It represents the first of its kind in the world, and I believe it puts South Africa firmly and squarely on the global stage in terms of innovation and the decarbonisation of heavy-duty transportation.
If Anglo wants something to happen, it happens. Now we're seeing the truck, because Anglo wanted it to happen, it is here. We can see it today.
This is the first in the world, really. So today, seated as we are here, gathered as we are, we are making world history right here in Mokgalakwena, right here in Limpopo Premier, right here in South Africa.
Last but not least, I would like to take this opportunity to let you know Anglo-American, the PGM business for our company. So our company, as a diversified international multinational mining company, we directly provide the clients the customized PGM solution. So we have always been committed towards putting safety first. Not only do we provide a high-quality metallic offering, but also we want to ensure the security of supply to the customers. We established the top-of-the-class supply chain and logistics system, and we provide a market-competitive risk management and a pricing mechanism. We have a very authoritative market insights. With that, I finished my presentation. Thank you very much. Thank you. So if you are interested in the topic like that, you can feel free to reach me so that we can continue our discussion offline. Thank you.